I'm sitting here with Clayton, who's my son. We decided to do this because we thought it would be an interesting exercise. I'm a 57-year-old, what I would like to consider reasonably open-minded uh, man. Clayton is, on the other hand, a 22-year-old open-minded. And from perspective of a 57-year-old and a 22-year-old, we just thought a conversation would be interesting about some three scary topics. And the disclaimer before I start. Clayton's not a medical professional. Clayton's not a medical health professional. I'm not a medical professional, Nothing that we're giving is advice. Nothing that we're doing is recommended. Nothing that we're saying should be taken as anything other than a dad and a son having a chat about stuff going on in the world today. And the three topics we decided we want to talk about, which are probably going to interbleed into each other. The first one is the question of wokeism in the world today. Woke culture, all the way from the one end to the other end, the one end being fully woke and present to the plight of everybody in the world, to the other end going, what the fuck is this all about? The second topic is social media and the impact that social media is having not only on our psychology and our mental health, but on business. And the final one is on young people entering the business world today in a world where there's wokeism and there's social media and all the other plethora of things. These are the three topics that I asked you to brief on. And when I asked you that I wanted to do this conversation, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, it's definitely something that is quite a loaded topic. Every single one of them seems pretty straightforward, but there's so much history and so much depth within it that it can be quite loaded. So I personally love talking about these kind of things. As you say, I'm quite an open-minded person, being raised by you and mom. So it was something that definitely intrigued me, of course. It's something that I feel like you also do have to tread a fine line in how you speak about it, which was a challenge that I think is going to be quite interesting for us to target or to tackle today. So if anyone does hear something that they don't really like, we apologize in advance, but this is once again just our own personal meanderings. But overall, just very excited. Obviously, as you said, these are three topics that are really affecting pretty much everyone in the world today. And it's not really spoken about enough. It's something that is kind of acknowledged, but not really had in depth within. So it's going to be nice to kind of just talk about it with you, because we've never really gone in depth about these kind of topics. We've glanced on them before, but not gone in the depth of it.
So I want to ask you a question. We've told you that we're starting on three topics, and I'm going to actually go straight to a completely different one.
Of course.
It's a whole pile of studies that seem to show that depression and anxiety in the world is rising rapidly, and especially in your generation. It certainly seems to be a massive trend that's happening around the world, especially within your generation and with men, by the way. This is not in any way saying that women don't get depressed. And so
of course.
This is just, it seems to be statistically higher suicide rate and really in men. Do you think any of this has any correlation to the rising tide of things like wokeism and social media and increased pressures on people in the workplace today?
I think it has some ties stronger than others. A big part of within it that I do acknowledge is especially within men, because as you said, it does affect most people. But with my own personal experiences, I've noticed with women, it's a lot easier to vocalize your opinions and your thoughts and your feelings deep within it. It's a kind of socially accepted norm for women to kind of come up and talk about these things. However, if you look anywhere on social media with these kind of mindsets, kind of red pill is what they would call it. A big acknowledgement is that it's not a socially accepted thing for men to come out and how they feel. It's something that depicts you as weak. And this is kind of a very outdated mindset that I believe, but it's that mindset that, the men should be the provider. The men should be able to put the meal on the table for the family. No one really cares about your feelings. You have to make sure your wives and your children are going to be sorted for. Everything else is just a byproduct of it. And that's something that's a very, very old way of thinking. But I do feel like it's still a social norm to accept that today. And so I myself included, but also many people that I've known, when you feel down, you don't feel like it's natural to come up and talk about it. And that's a big thing, because when you bottle it in, it just builds and it builds and it builds to the point where it almost explodes. And that's a big issue that it's being faced.
I was listening, it's funny, I was listening at gym yesterday to a podcast. And I suppose this is acknowledgement to Stephen Bartlett and his podcast, A Diary of a CEO. He had Martha Beck on, who's a life coach. And Martha Beck was talking about the initiation of women in certain cultures, is to, at a certain age, take the woman away and put her in isolation. And in certain cultures, men of a certain age is to take them away and put them in a community in isolation. But the woman is literally on her own for days, and the man is in the forest or in the bushes or in the middle of nowhere in a community. And the reason is because men in these kind of older, perhaps Asian, African traditions, the men are used to isolation and they need to learn to integrate better, and the women are used to integration and need to learn to stand alone together. So it supports exactly what you're saying. It's funny how the two come together.
Because there's a big part of that I would personally see as well, is that mindset of, the man being the leader. Even today, it's a good thing that it is equating a little bit. It's becoming a little bit more old-minded. But you still look at many of the top companies. It's a man CEO, a man CFO. It's that mindset that the man was the leader. And so he had to learn those leadership traits while being thrown into these kind of things.
Not a good thing, though.
No, of course not. I think it's a very kind of interesting direction that we're heading towards, where, it's with that realm of feminism. And I myself, I would say I am a feminist, but there are obviously two extremes to these sides, And that role of feminism is a very good thing in the sense that it shows that, a woman can be just as good as a CEO as a man, and it's something that we're slowly moving, exactly, or better even. And it's something that we're slowly moving towards, which is good. But obviously, pendulums always kind of switch and shift between when there's these kind of big changes.
Look, in a strange way, we've actually started on the wokeism topic without even starting on the wokeism topic. But on the wokeism topic, even on this men-woman issue, you've got extremes. You've got toxic masculinity, especially now on social media.
Yep.
You've got, what's that guy's name? Look, he's not my favorite. He's not my style. He's not my...
Charlie Kirk is Ben Shapiro is another big one.
This kind of... men have to get out and prove themselves. And
Alex Hormozy. No, Alex Hormozy has some good points into it. Yeah.
Again, this is perspective. Everyone has their own perspective. But anyway, there was Paul. I can't remember. But there are some really toxic masculinity, and then there are some extremist kind of
toxic femininity as well. That's a big part to it. What we're
trying to have toxic femininity.
I would see that as well. Yes, it's a lot of the time you're seeing on social media. It's I think it's a good thing, feminism striving towards equality, but there is that kind of movement towards kind of going a complete shift against, where women are kind of trying to acknowledge the positives of what women being integrated in society and the way that they're doing in modern times, but also going further than that and kind of acknowledging or not acknowledging the responsibilities that come with it as well. So I think on both sides, there are these kind of thoughts within them, like remember a few years ago that trending thing on social media, that kill all men topic and that kind of stuff.
No,
that was a big thing on social media, mainly Twitter, but it was a big feminist movement.
X.
Yeah, X. Sorry, my bad. But it was a movement of kill all men. It was with all the rape victims, because obviously that is a big thing. But it was a kind of putting all men in a blanket, and that's kind of taking it that step far in that feminism side, if that makes sense.
So the reason I don't know about that is I'm not on X or Twitter. Have never been. Disclaimer. #. And because I try not to follow as much of this toxic news as I can. I really try as hard as I can to actively not follow any toxic news. Anyway, wokeism.
Yeah.
For me, who's 57 years old, and mom, who's 35, she'll feel good if she sees this. For me, who's 57 years old, who has grown up in a world where wokeism didn't exist, and now, it bubbled up first, I think, probably in the racist issues. Then it hit the gay, homophobic issues, and now, of course, it is swept across a broad spectrum of everything. All of these are just and necessary and vital, and these are some causes that have actually changed humanity for the better.
Yeah,
lots of these. I had, without any question of doubt, I don't think there's anyone in the world who can sit back and go, many of these policies were right. But now we're emerging into some new woke policies about gender neutrality, like he, she, they, what do you identify as? And we start to hit questions, but fundamental questions for me, like a 6-year-old child would not be given the right to say, I want to go and have a cigarette. If your 6-year-old child came to you saying, I want to go and have a cigarette, you would say,
you're not old enough.
You're not old enough to make that call. If your 6-year-old child came to you and said, I want a tequila, or I want to smoke a joint, you'd look at your 6-year-old child and say, hang on, you can't make that decision yet. But when your 6-year-old child comes up and tells you that they've chosen a gender, now that's become okay. Now, I'm doing as hard as I can to not take any sides on this, but I'm struggling to see a world where that type of equality is balanced against the massive racial inequality that existed in the 20th century, and the massive, and prior to that, and the massive homophobic inequality that existed, and the massive. So these massive issues that existed, and now we've got this new word. You're somebody who's grown up with it. It's for you. It's part of your life. How do you feel about this? How is your generation? And again, you can't speak for a generation, but how are most of the people and your peers feeling about this kind of issue on the woke movement?
Yeah. Firstly, I'd kind of want to revisit the very beginning of what you said, and I want to challenge that. From what I've noticed, it's you mentioned that the woke culture and that kind of cancel culture, in a sense, is something that's a more recent kind of thing. I would personally see that whole culture as generational, going thousands of years back. But the one big thing that changes is, if you look at humans, 200,000 years ago even, there were these very small tribes. And if you did something wrong, you'd be exiled from that tribe. But now it's kind of expanded to such a sense with the likes of social media, but also with how connected people are. The 7 strings theory, where you're 7 connections away from everyone. It's on such a bigger scale as it is today as it was in the past. So that's why it's becoming such a bigger issue, because instead of just being exiled from your tiny community and going to the next one, you are exiled by a much larger target group. And that's something that's the big change between it in those days. But the way that I see it myself, I'm not very popular amongst my peers in the way that I view it, of course. Once again, I would say I'm a very open-minded person. However, the way that I see woke culture, but in particular cancel culture, because I agree with you in the history of racial inequality, homophobia, all that kind of stuff. Actually, the term woke culture came from the 1930s, and that was with the African-American movement. It was stay woke, and it was a way of targeting racial inequalities. But the way that I see it now is that kind of stay woke and that woke culture has become a blanket term for everything, whether you're offended by your race, your gender, anything. And it's become such a blanket term that there's no real kind of target behind it anymore. It's just something that's become diluted over the decades or over the years. And for me, that kind of blurs the line between accountability and actual cancel culture. So if someone, as you said, does a genuine social inaptitude, then you're not really facing that accountability. Because for myself, looking on social media, you don't go onto X and that kind of stuff. But for me, looking on X, on YouTube, Instagram, that kind of stuff, one thing I've started noticing with myself is if you look at a post, oftentimes you don't even form an opinion by yourself. You just click on the comments, and then your kind of opinion is based on the backlash of the people in the comments. And so that for me is what woke culture is becoming. It's that kind of targeted by something that isn't really your opinion. And
So you don't actually have an opinion.
you don't have an opinion. You're just following the heavy, heavy backlash from other people. And for me, it kind of becomes a domino effect. And when you feel like you don't really care about that opinion, then you become that outlier in society. And for me, that's kind of what's going wrong with cancel culture at the moment. There was actually a study done at an American college in the 1950s, which I found quite similar to kind of what's happening now. And that was when they had many different target groups, and there was always eight people in a group. And what they would do is they would get a paper and they would have a line on the paper. And then you'd have to look at that line. Then they'd take that paper away and they'd give you a new paper with 3 lines. And you had to tell which line was the same length as the other. So they'd make one long, one short, and one the actual one. And what they didn't tell, it was kind of a manipulated test. So in some of the groups, it was genuinely just 8 people doing the test. But in the other groups, there was 1 person for the test, and 7 of them were actors. And what they would do is they'd ask which line was the same. And in the group where it was just all the people doing the genuine test, it was less than 1% of the time where the people would get it wrong, where they would get the line wrong. However, in the manipulated group, it was about 37% where the people would intentionally say the wrong one, even though they know inside, just to fit in with that societal norm. And I feel like that's where woke culture is heading towards, where you might not even feel it in yourself. You don't feel offended by that. You don't feel like it's done any harm. But to fit in with societal norms, you feel like you have to. And that is where that pendulum swinging a bit too far, in the sense, if that makes sense.
It does.
Yeah.
So then what with the woke culture? So, what I'm struggling to see, if I watch 3 generations, we've got 3 generations in our home where we live. We've got Nana, we've got us, we've got you, and your sister, and at some stage you're probably going to have kids. Is there a solution to this? Is there actually, do we have to just wait until everyone evolves to becoming fully woke? Or actually, is the world going to wake up and go, you can't become fully woke?
Yeah.
Is there a solution to this? Or just is this now going to become ingrained as another human condition that causes anguish, that causes stress, that causes anxiety, that causes depression?
Yeah.
And are we manifesting just another thing that's going to cause some headaches in the world?
I think there is a way to target it. Because from what I've been noticing in that cancel culture, and I'll touch on how I feel about it exactly in a few moments, but what I've started noticing, if you look throughout the years of people that had been cancelled. So, for example, I don't know if you know the comedian Shane Gillis. He always does, because his cousin's Down syndrome, and he does these Down syndrome jokes and that kind of stuff. He was fired from SNL for making an offensive joke. But nowadays, he's doing shows again. He's more popular than ever. He's even more edgy than ever. What I feel like happens in this kind of cancel culture nowadays is there's no real integration for them back into society. It's just either people just stop caring about what they said, or they just forget about what happened. And then it's kind of like, oh, all of a sudden they're back into society. The way that I feel would be good is finding a way to reintegrate them into society. It's kind of like prison in a sense, but not nearly as severe. Because I think cancel culture is very dangerous. It doesn't affect the celebrities the way that people think it does. You know, you look at someone like J.K. Rowling. She wrote about a lot of homophobia and that kind of stuff. But if you look at her, she's still selling millions and millions and millions and millions of copies. So she wasn't really canceled. The people that it affects are people like you and me. It's the people that nowadays are living in society where they're so scared to say what they actually believe in because they're scared of being exiled from society. So they just choose to not do it. And that is the real danger of it, because the amount of ideas that haven't been touched on because people are just scared to say them because of experiencing or seeing people experiencing cancel culture, that's the real dangers. And if you can find a way to create a society where people aren't scared to say a joke that might be a little bit too edgy, or to say coming up with the idea that might be a little bit too edgy, because in that kind of reintegration where you can learn from your mistakes, that's where growth actually happens. When you try and close that whole branch off, no growth is ever going to happen. But how you get to that stage is definitely a hard point.
The question I have is that you're talking a lot about cancel culture in famous people.
Yeah.
To be honest, I'm not sure if I really worry that much about famous people.
Yeah. But I'm worry that it happens to you. I'm
talking about the average Joe Schmo, or the 17-year-old schoolgirl at school, or the 21-year-old guy entering the workplace who happens to make an inappropriate comment at work
and gets fired,
or gets stigmatized,
gets
cancel culture at work of being he's that guy or the 17-year-old girl at school who has an opinion that is considered wrong or anti-woke, and then she gets ostracized from all of her friends, and as a result, of course, she starts to feel isolated and starts to feel alone. And then again, the 50-year-old man who's doing his very best to try and navigate his way through all of this kind of shifting sands and change that's happening in the world, who happens to make a wrong comment. Thank goodness I haven't done that yet, who happens to make a wrong comment in the world kind of, when I say the world, his world.
Yeah.
It's not the world. In celebrity status, the world points a finger. It's on the news. In these situations, this person's world points a finger and ostracizes them. And that's, for me, the dangerous thing, because it leads back to how we started with this anxiety and there's a rise in anxiety and depression, and we've just created more reasons for it.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, what's your personal opinion on woke? You said you're going to share it.
So once again, I feel like you've just mentioned, it doesn't affect the people like it affects us people. It doesn't affect those major celebrities because, once again, people forget about it. But because it's becoming such a blanket term, that's, I feel like, is happening in these kind of communities, where you're not a celebrity, in my personal world and stuff, where you say something offensive, people are going to be offended. But because it's such a common thing to experience in society nowadays, I feel like it doesn't have the effects that people actually believe. Within a few months, it often becomes something that's just forgotten about, or something that has moved on, where people just stop caring about that thing. And I feel like the fear of being cancelled is something that's holding us back as a society, because you're so scared of being ostracized or so scared of being kind of judged because of it, even though the actual consequences are never really as big as you may initially think it to be. But once again, people are now so scared to say it, and that stops ideas from coming up, or stops actual injustices from coming up. So her name, Emile Wen Zhao. This was a case in 2019. She was an author, and she was writing a bunch of fictional books. And what happened is, on one of her books, the first book that came out, people read a view on race and that kind of stuff that they didn't agree with. And there was a lot of backlash on social media, saying that this is not right and that kind of stuff. And so eventually she went to her publicist and stopped the publishing from coming out further. And she had to edit a lot of the things that she wrote about. But when you actually looked into it in detail, she was a person from China that had become an immigrant into the US. And she was writing about a lot of the inequalities of the work atmosphere in China and human rights and human trafficking issues that were happening in China. And it was her personal accounts. But people viewed it, and it wasn't really something that they liked because it was a dark topic. And so she had to stop writing about it. And then what she wrote about further wasn't something that she felt the passion for. She changed it not because she felt the passion to do it, but because she was scared of what the backlash would be from it. And that's something that happens to the average Joes, like us. And that stops people from progressing. And that's the big question, is how do we stop people from having that fear from saying something that people might not agree with? Because it is impossible to have every single person in the world agree with you.
Yeah. Look, this woke topic, we can spend the entire hour on a woke topic, but I'm going to segue from the woke topic to the social media.
They're heavily tied. Very heavily tied.
But they're not only heavily tied. In fact, they are heavily tied, but there is also a standalone section to the social media issue. You and I were discussing recently a study that shows a 100% correlation and direct link between levels of personal satisfaction, meaning, and purpose in your life, otherwise known as happiness. But, let's not go to happiness, because it's not so much about happiness as a destination as this ongoing journey. But people who had personal feelings of meaning and purpose and fulfillment and eudaimonia in their life, joy in their life, and social media use. And the higher the social media use, the lower the happiness, to simplify the word. And the lower the social media use, the higher the happiness. So it's linked to the woke culture. But again, for us, social media is something that it didn't exist. And we've kind of grown into it. You've grown up with it. It's become, I actually look at you and I can't remember when last I saw you make a phone call.
Yeah, I can't remember the
last time. Other than to us.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time I made a phone call. You just send them WhatsApp and you hope they reply quickly.
No, it's interesting, even WhatsApp, because in certain countries like the United States, they barely use WhatsApp.
Yeah, but there's still iMessage and that
they have a messaging service, but they don't pick up the phone and phone each other. You don't ever pick up the phone. You phone us because
we bitch at you.
We just go pick up the phone and phone us if you've got a question. But I don't think I've ever seen you phone your mates.
No, don't do that.
You just pop a message off to each other. Now, surely something must have been lost in that process. Now, for you, you wouldn't see it as lost, because how do you lose something you never had?
It's a good question. I don't know. I feel like the way that social media is of today, I'm reading, you've seen it, a book called Sapiens, and it's by Yuval Noah Harari, something like that. Really good book. I'm really enjoying it, but kind of talks about the deep histories of humanity, starting from the earliest forms of Homo sapiens and that kind of stuff, and expanding, going further and further as we are today. And when you read it, there's a lot of kind of repetition and patterns and how we experience our lives. So, if you look at how we are today in humanity, objectively speaking, we are probably in the best state of the world we've ever been. People are healthier than ever. They're living longer than ever. Unemployment at the moment is like kind of, obviously back then, unemployment was in a different kind of way that it was framed, but it's a lot better than it is today. Diseases that were affecting millions of people back then are not an issue in today. So objectively speaking, we're in an amazing point. And that's why
Can I interrupt you? I have to. Uncle Craig, my brother, him and I sat and had a few glasses of wine one night and ended up in a very big debate about this. And I was saying the world's in a bit of a dark place at the moment with anxiety and depression. And he was going, nonsense. Bullshit. The world's in the best flipping place it's ever been. People are living longer. Health is longer than ever. Longevity is longer than ever. It depends on which metrics you're looking at.
If we were to get a time machine and we were to travel 100 years ago, 1924, and we were to go to the most optimistic person and we'd say, what do you think the world looks like in 100 years? And they wouldn't picture this with the amount of things that are prevalent in our society and how much easier it is to be back then, or now, as it was back then. Even the most optimistic person. So objectively speaking, we're a lot better off than we were centuries ago. But this is where social media comes in, because we've spoken about this as well. The negative things gain traction. And I feel like a huge issue in what people focus on today is they're focusing in very close moments, not decades. So you are often affected, like myself. I'm a big football fan. And if someone puts a post that you don't believe in, you get into a petty argument, it's never going to affect you in a week's time, but it's something that affects you deeply within that moment. And that's what social media is so good at. It gets those reactions out of people because that's how they make their money, getting people onto the platform. And it's something, it really shifts the perspective on how people think, because in reality, we're in a really good position. We have it a lot easier than our great-great-grandfathers or our great-great-grandmothers would have had it back then.
You really have just given me something that I've never considered before. Maybe this was the whole reason for this podcast. Is actually we might be in a better place objectively. In reality, we might be in a better place than ever. However, due to things like social media, we may not be experiencing the fact that we're in a better place. If I go back 100 years ago, go back to 1924, the chances are good that I'm living very much in the present.
Yeah.
I don't have a television feeding me bad news.
Mm-hmm.
I have a newspaper, maybe, that's giving me a little bit of bad news every now and then. I have a neighbor who I sit and I talk to. I have people that I talk to on the way to work, because I don't have a cell phone that I'm personally all the time captivated with. I'm very much living in the now and my bubble of the world. 1924. Fast forward 100 years, I'm living longer, health issues are better, unemployment, average income,
more time off,
how much time you've got off, all of these kind of things might actually in reality be better. But the truth is, I'm not living in the present.
Yeah. I feel like with social media, it's now so heavily and deeply embedded within us. And this also ties back to how we were hundreds of thousands of years ago. If you look at hundreds of thousands of years ago, when people were in these small tribes, you had to be accepted. You had to be able to fit in with the tribe to survive. And now it's still the same thing, but your tribe is not maybe 50 people, it's thousands of people on social media. And
is that your tribe, though?
I would say so. Yes. If you look on Instagram, for example, I don't know, 1,000 something people that I follow, and I look at their feed. You're constantly seeing, I have people from Creston that I haven't spoken about in years, but you follow their life and you see how they grow up and that kind of stuff. And honestly, it's deeply embedded within you, but I feel like you always have that kind of need within you to be accepted or to be fit in by all these people, which is why you look at the likes of social media, people posting the best parts about their life. Like, oh, I'm here. Oh, I've got 6-pack abs now and stuff. Even though you might not really think it in the moment, I think it's deep within you that you feel like you should or you have to be accepted by these people. And it's something that you'll never be able to do. And that's why it's becoming such a hard thing and why people are becoming a lot more depressed, because you care too much about what people think about you. You know, like if you talk about these kind of histories with how our ancestors, you lived by telling stories and evolving from that. You do the exact same thing today. You tell stories, you're accepted by your people, and it's just harder to do it now. It's harder to reach all these people.
Yeah, I can't get past that tribe piece.
Yeah.
And the reason is that I think that there's a difference between a community and a tribe.
Yeah.
And I think you live in a community, but inside that community, you have a tribe. And your tribe is the people who you gather with and you break bread with and you eat with. And when you have issue in your life, listen, my child is sick. But you gather the tribe to hand your child to the tribe to help make medicine Now, when your child is sick, you don't get onto Instagram with your friends from Creston and from 20 years ago going, hey guys, my child is sick, please come and help. This is a community, and that's great. And I think this is one of the challenges that I'm seeing is that, and again, it's a 57-year-old perspective, so it's not right. But I think that at the moment is that people who are in their 20s believe that this is my tribe. This is actually, for I'd say 60% of those people, if you disappeared tomorrow, they wouldn't know that you had disappeared tomorrow. So how's that your tribe?
Yeah, so I'm really glad that you are kind of touching on this. I align with what you say, but I'm talking about what's viewed upon in society. So I don't know if you've read the book, I think his name's Mark Mason, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that book. It touched quite heavily on what you just said. It was that people have all these kind of tribes that they follow. But what I really like to take away from it is every person, every day, you kind of think of it like a battery. You have a certain amount of fucks to give. And every time pardon my French, but every time you give a fuck, it's costing you your energy, your time. And the more fucks you give, the less energy you're going to have at the end of the day. And when I first read it, I kind of thought it was such a pessimistic way of living life, because it just feels like being a jerk. You know, you just say, I don't give a fuck. And at the end of the day, after kind of months of reading it, you realize there are a lot of truths behind it. It's actually identifying your core values, your core tribes, as you mentioned as well, realizing that these people that I knew when I was 10, they don't matter to me. Like, as you said, obviously I care about them, but if they were to disappear, I probably wouldn't even realize. And it's realizing what is very close to you and realizing what you really care about and saving your fucks for that. And realizing that everything outside of that, it's not really something that you should be giving all your time and all your energy towards. And I feel like that's something that people today are really struggling with, actually identifying their core values and what they actually believe in. So they give too many.
Well, actually, they're spending probably, I don't know, the average human being's probably spending 6 to 8 hours giving fucks on their phone because that's what social media is doing. And social media's algorithms are designed to get all of your fucks. So thank you, Mark Mason. Social media is designed to say, I want you to care. And so you've got some of the smartest people with the most money designed saying, I want to hack your brain. Your brain, I want to own that. It's almost, this sounds terrible, but can you imagine if somebody came up to you, a big, huge guy came up to you and said, I'm going to make you my bitch. How afraid would you be?
Be terrified.
We'd be terrified. But actually, that's what's in your hand 24 hours a day, is the biggest, scariest dudes, the most money, the most brain power, the most scientific research, the biggest guys in the world are coming up to you saying, I'm going to make you my bitch. And you know what we're doing?
We're just
we're going, amen, amen. And we're becoming a slave to this. It's the most extraordinarily, we're giving our lives away to this at the moment. Now, how do you stop that? Because actually, it's like cocaine.
It's even worse, because cocaine, it's not really something that's socially accepted. So if you do cocaine in front of your parents, they're not going to care.
You wouldn't be around at this point.
But if you're on Instagram or TikTok or Twitter, they're not going to care because it's just something that's so socially accepted. I often think it's even more than just being on your phone. I often kind of find the situation a bit like Pavlov's theory, with the dogs, where the average human touches their phone over 2,000 times a day.
Because I know Pavlov's theory of the dog. For anyone who might be listening who's maybe, 17 years old and hasn't heard of Pavlov's theory of the dog without them having to go and look it up. Just in a helicopter view.
So basically, Pavlov's theory was a guy who had a bunch of these dogs, and every time he would feed them, he would ring a bell. And by the end of it, he wouldn't even attach the food. He would just ring a bell and their mouths would start salivating. They would expect the reward. And that's the same as social media. You don't even have to be on your phone. It's in your pockets and you feel that vibration and you're expecting a reward. You're going to get a message from a girl you like, or you're going to see Ronaldo has posted on Instagram and you get to see his abs or whatever. It's you're expecting a reward. And that's something that's so deeply embedded within us now, and it's really affecting our dopamine stream. I spoke about this with you, but with the likes of cocaine and all these drugs, the big difference within them is cocaine is one big heavy rush of dopamine, and then after that it kind of stabilizes.
You crash a bit, feel a bit crap.
With social media, it's this constant, not as much as cocaine, but it's these constant little rises of hits of dopamine, and you're constantly striving for that. It's I don't know if you've heard of doom scrolling.
Oh yes.
So that's the big issue behind it. You mentioned there's so much money being put into it. And the amount of times that I would wake up and I'd be in a good mood, and then you go on Instagram and you see, not to get too political, but you see bombings in the Middle East, or you see George Floyd or something like that. You see these negative news, and then you think, okay, I want to feel something positive. So you keep scrolling, and then you see another thing negative, and then you see another thing negative, and then you see another thing negative. And you just, before the day's even started, you're now in this kind of existential state. And it's something that I feel a lot of the time. And I know a lot of people my age do as well, where you're upset, but the best way I could ever describe it, I've struggled to formulate how it feels, but the best way to put it is you're stuck in the middle of a field with fog around you, and you're upset, but you don't know why, but you just are so unclear of everything around you, and you're just kind of walking in the fog. and you just kind of have to accept it. You're not upset, you're upset, but you don't know why, and you don't know how to formulate it. And I feel a lot of it comes with doom scrolling. It establishes that feeling deep within you that you can't really describe.
I think that walking in the fog analogy is such a beautiful analogy, because keeping it going, there's an old saying that says, if you're lost, there are two important questions. One, so you're lost. You're driving along, you're lost, and you phone a friend, and you say to the friend, I'm lost. The friend has two questions. Number one, where are you? And you say, I don't know.
I'm lost.
I don't know, I'm lost. And they say, okay. The second one is, where do you want to go? And you go, I don't know. I just want out of here. Then the friend says to you, turn left. Because if you don't know where you are and you don't know where you need to go, then actually that's got to be the darkest place in the world to be in. And what you're talking about is that fog. You're standing in the middle of the field. You can't see anywhere. So now I don't know where I am. And I know I want to get out of here, but I don't know whether I should be going that way, or that way. So it's a brilliant analogy.
And I think it also really heavily ties into with what you're saying, and how even though objectively we're in a very good state, but we're at an all-time high in terms of anxiety, depression, all these things, it's because I know I felt it, and I've been quite lucky in my life, but it gets even worse where you know you're upset, but you can't even speak about why. And so it's just something that builds because you don't know why you're upset. You're just lost within this fog, and it's just something that just keeps building and building and building. A big thing I've experienced, in your early 20s, there are almost expectations from you, especially if, your parents did well in life, or if you have some sort of expectation that you've set upon yourself. And then you're constantly looking on social media and you're seeing these influencers who are 20 years old and they've made $1 million. And you're looking at a friend of yours from high school who's now married and has a kid and stuff. And it's a lot of these expectations that you already put onto yourself, and it's just being completely blown out of proportion by social media. And so you devaluate yourself just by looking at these kind of things. And that's a big thing that leads to a lot of the anguish as well.
It's interesting because, again, what social media is doing is causing us to compare ourselves with other people. You're looking at the guy who's made himself $1 million at age 20, and you're looking at your friend who's got married and has got a kid. But actually, that's not your journey, that's their journey.
Exactly.
But we draw this comparison going. And actually, what it boils down to is, what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
Why haven't I managed to? And that's what it's doing, is that's the feeling that it's causing inside of us.
Yeah.
Is the truth is, if we really distill it, it comes down to this question of, am I enough?
Yeah.
Maybe there's something wrong with me. Am I enough? And I think that that's really the core of the issue. I'm busy doing some private work, which I'll share briefly, but can you indulge me for a sec?
Of course.
Do you mind? I think I might have had this discussion with you, and I can't remember if I have, about anxiety and depression being on a dial. Did I have this discussion?
Yeah.
Where it starts off just with feeling meh. Just like meh. Like the fog. You're in the fog. And then it goes to, I'm getting worried. I'm staying in this fog a hell of a long time, and I seem to be visiting the fog a lot more often.
Why am I not happy?
What's wrong? What's wrong with me? And that deeper question starts to lead to a little bit of anxiety going, shit, I hope I'm okay. I wonder if I need to go get checked out. I wonder if I should go and get therapy. I wonder if I need to go and do a psychedelic trip to be able to break this pattern. I wonder if I need to. And then that leads to, oh my goodness, I'm starting to get anxiety. I can't breathe sometimes. There's some moments where I'm, then that leads to literally isolation sometimes. I need to be alone, can't be around people. And then that leads to depression. There's this dial. And there's this theory there's this thought that you get onto, I don't know, SSRIs, or, get onto some sort of antidepressant. Whatever. You get onto an antidepressant and it's like flicking a switch. You go from depressed to not depressed. Well, actually,
you go to feeling nothing, though.
Well, who knows? I'm not a psychologist.
Yeah.
I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a medical doctor. So I can't. But I just think that there's this whole menu of things that you can do that seem to work.
Yeah.
From getting sunlight every day, to exercise, to going for a walk, to meditation, to Buddhist retreats, to breathing, breath work, to
Microdosing ayahuasca.
Microdosing, actually full-blown psychedelic trips to be able to ketamine.
Yeah.
Ketamine therapy, which is being offered legally by so many psychologists now. All of them exist massively, but our levels of anxiety and depression are still rising.
Yeah.
Why?
I think for me, there's a lot of points that indicate and target towards that. But a big one is laziness, honestly. Like, it's so much easier if I'm depressed, to go on to medication and I feel better. And I don't feel that kind of deep within me anymore, rather than, oh, now I have to wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning before I start work to go to the gym. And then after the gym, I have to meditate. And after that, I have to do this. And after that, I have to do that. It's so much easier to do that. And it's such a accepted thing to do those kind of things as well. Not to get into conspiracy theories and that kind of stuff, but the pharmaceutical industry, they make a lot of money from people suffering.
Yeah.
And so it's something that has been shown in society that it's okay to be like that and to get onto these type of things, because that's how they're making their money. And so it's so hard to do these kind of smaller incremental things to get better. And it's a lot easier to do these kind of drastic measures.
But it is interesting because the way we climbed into the fog and from the fog to higher and higher was in incremental measures.
Yeah.
And we're unwilling to, and I don't think we should be waking up, by the way, waking up in the morning and going to gym and then coming home and meditating and then going into sunlight and then doing some grounding and then taking my microdosing. And after I've done my microdosing, I've now got to go and do a little bit of breath work and, Wim Hof as hard as I can. And when that's all done, I've got to get out my art book.
See, I'm getting anxiety even just thinking about this, I'm getting anxiety just thinking about how much you have to do in that day. Yeah.
See, I don't think that we should do that. I think we should remember the dial that took us there and then just start dialing it down. And again, I'm not a doctor, so this is not, but I just think we just daily, I'm going to gym. That's starting the dial.
Yeah.
Then every day I'm going to doodle. And while I'm doodling, I know that I'm consciously aware that I'm going to dial this down. Huh?
Like James Clear, Atomic Habits.
Yeah.
Small incremental things,
Yeah. But anyway, social media. So we got woke, we got social media, we got the final topic, which I want to bring in and tie this whole thing together and go, you're 22 years old. You're entering the workplace. You're about to finish your degree. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I know that it's not done, but
getting there.
We believe it's going to be done. It's going to get sorted out. Been in Amsterdam on your own for 4 years, and now you're entering the workplace.
Yeah.
How are you feeling about entering the workplace? Not for you, but again, your generation, entering the workplace in an environment where on social media, there's the TikTok entrepreneur who's made $1 million freaking dollars and is, I was born yesterday and now I've made $1 million.
Yeah.
And then there's the guy who is just getting a job. And the one who's just starting as a real estate agent and the one who's becoming a game ranger. And I don't know, what do you think about entering the world in a woke world with social media? And now you're entering into the workforce.
Yeah. No, it's funny that you mentioned that social media part to it. So I've been trying to get into more shape, trying to get a six pack and all that kind of stuff. And if you look on fitness TikToks or Instagram, trying to tips to kind of be healthier, you just look and your feed is just flooded with these guys with 8-packs and huge chests and shoulders. But Harvard did a study that showed in the US, one in every, I think it's 45,000 people have 6-pack abs between 12 and 15% body fat. So
one in every
45,000.
One in every 45,000 people.
Yeah. And so you're being flooded by all these people that look.
This was Harvard University.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you're being flooded by these thoughts that, everyone seems to be like that. When in reality, you're just like everyone else. You're trying to get to that point, but you're looking at these selected few that are at that point and thinking it can't be that hard if so many people are there. When in reality, they're just that small group that made it, but it's being exemplified by social media. There was also another, turning it onto the business part now, was Harvard Business Review. Harvard Business Review, quite a credible source. They indicated that within the first 5 years, 90 to 95% of small businesses fail within the first 5 years.
Very much.
And this is something that I've experienced. So for those who don't know, I've been at an entrepreneurial university, business focused with entrepreneurship mindset. And there's been this huge mindset within Amsterdam, but not just in my university, amongst many people that I know, because they're being flooded by, as you mentioned, these millionaires on TikTok and stuff. It's like, oh, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to start my own business and I'm going to change the world with my business. When in reality, it's really not how it works. Obviously, there are those selected few, but in the vast scale of things, it's really not how it really works. Even in my university, there's about 18 people in my class, and I don't think there's a single person now in the fourth year that is working on the same business they started in the first year. And luckily, while you're at university, most people are fortunate enough to have that safety net by your parents, whatever. But when you're out and you start it by yourself, you don't have that safety net often when you're not in university and you're going out into the world for the first time. And I think it's this big, it's a big thing to romanticize, where people are going to become entrepreneurs and they're going to make so much money. But for me, the way that I view it, I see a lot of the time, I'm not very popular in this exact mindset, even though there are a few people in my university school that are going to get into a business and gain experience. But the way that I see it is a lot of people who are wanting to just immediately start their business straight at 20 or 21. I personally see it as somewhat lazy. And that is because, for me, I worked in a restaurant at 17, 18, 19, trying to pay my rent and that kind of stuff. And in those times, you have to get adapted to structure, to a boss and that kind of thing. And I think in that time, it's very important where you learn the concept of and the value of money. You learn how to deal with money and you learn how to do what you have with the money that you have and that kind of stuff. And it's a tough period. When I was waiting tables, there were times where I'd get home at 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, and it's tough. And then you have class at 9 o'clock in the morning. So you get 3 hours sleep. And it's not nice, but you learn a lot from that time. I learned so much on time management and how to actually track what I'm doing, how to get this deadline done before I go to the restaurant, before I do that. And I feel like if you're trying to skip that stage, you're missing out on a lot of the values that are learned from them. And at its core as well, I think that business is about people. And I think at its core, dealing with people and how to interact with people. And you learn a lot about people skills when you work in these kind of industries, gaining knowledge, that kind of stuff. And then obviously, once you've gained that knowledge, there are those people that can go out into the world and change the world. But I feel like skipping that step, you miss out on a lot of learnings from that step before going out into the world, if that makes sense.
It does. I think that there's no right one size fits all.
Of course not.
I've grown up with certain truths that I knew as truths. I'm fortunate to have had great mentors like Jim Rohn, who I've spent lots of time listening to, around, being with.
Tony Robbins.
Tony Robbins.
Yeah.
There's been lots of amazing, and I mean, if I had to try and list them all for you, I love to read.
Yeah.
And there's certain truths, and one of the truths that I grew up with, and it's weird because I consider them foundational truths. Mm-hmm. A lot of them are being cracked recently. And mainly because I grew up with them as fast, hard rules. And suddenly I'm going, well, maybe they're not fast, hard rules. So one of them was Winston Churchill, standing up going, never, ever, 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 ever quit. This was, and you get your teeth into something, and I'm not a quitter. Yeah. I'm not somebody who quits on stuff. And you when you've made a decision, you follow through. And I think it was even handed down by my parents. Yeah. My dad was, listen, son, if you start something, you finish it. And now you've got these young entrepreneurs failing forward. Yeah. You've got these young entrepreneurs coming in, challenging us, going, actually, Stephen Bartlett, again, just to come back to him, he has this thing going, guys, quit as often as you can.
Yeah.
Quit.
You learn more in
Quit.
failure than in success. Yeah.
Start something. If it's not working, quit. Start another thing. If it's not working, quit. Start another thing. If it's working, but you hate it, quit.
Yeah.
Now, this is just like, it's almost like I've got Mike Tyson standing in front of me, slapping me across the face. What's that game that you guys play?
Yeah, at Mercy or something.
No.
Yeah.
Because I'm looking at you and you saying, we need to go and get that experience. We need to, I don't know. I'm kind of now at the point going, maybe everything that I learned might be wrong. And maybe everything that I learned might be right. But what I do know is that it might be right or it might not be right for you. You're going to have to go figure this stuff out. You're just going to have to go figure this out.
Yeah. So that's, once again, just my opinions on it. You know, there's another person in my school who will probably leave this university, start a business by himself, and then fail and fail. But then there's another one who will work in the same business for many years trying to get it to start up. And doesn't mean one's right and one's wrong. It's just how you approach it yourself. And I think that's another thing.
But for you want to go and get some experience in the job.
Yeah, I think for myself, see a lot of in what I do, perfectionist in a sense. I like to know exactly what I'm going to do and what's expected from me and where it's going to go before I start it. I don't like kind of that fog, you know, not knowing where I'm going to be. And I feel like gaining that experience, going into the working atmosphere first, you gain a lot of not just knowledge, but experience. And it's easier to deal with these ventures once you have the experience within it.
Okay, so we're going to the workforce in a world of workism where we're going to have to tread our way through that in a workforce because you're not working for somebody else. With a world of social media, working for somebody else with all these expectations, and now we're working for somebody else, gaining some experience, which is great. But while we're getting that experience, we're coming home at night to our apartment, looking at our friend who's now started his company has made $1 million, and this other friend has made $4 million, and this other friend has got married and got children, and you going, my goodness, I'm in a low entry level job washing the dishes at the back room. And so you find yourself in the fog. Yeah. Because you will find yourself in the fog. And you're standing in the middle of the field in the fog going, oh my goodness, what's going on? Because that's exactly how it's going to play out. And now you actually have to start to make sure that you're navigating the anxiety and the depression that might kind of enter, because you don't want that shit. Right? You just want calm, zen, peace. Of course. And so, just to close it out, your opinion, woke. Let's use a real life story. Yours. You know, you've grown up in a woke world. You've grown up with social media. You've started to understand a bit about this fog. Breaks my heart that you even know that fog exists. Breaks my heart that you. But I know that fog exists.
Yeah.
Been there. What do you think are good guidelines for you to be able, or anyone emerging into the workplace in your age, to think about?
Yeah, once again, it really just depends on who you are. But for myself, it's just establishing a really core identity in who you are and what you believe in and what your values are and what motivates you, what drives you, that kind of stuff. Because as you said, if I go to an entry-level job and I'm getting paid not much money at all in my tiny apartment, and I go home and I look at my friend from university who now has a mansion, it's very easy to feel that state of anxiety. But when you realize deeply within you that you chose this for a reason, you've gone through the past that you chose for a reason, and you believe in yourself enough to trust that the choice that you made was best enough for you, I feel like it's a very good way of guiding that path where you believe in yourself and you believe in your values and what you believe in. That's enough to drive you forward like that. So just believe in who you are and what your values are and your upbringing. So values that you and mom and nana and grandpa and dopa and nanny and everyone taught me, having those core values, because then you have something when you feel in that fog, you're kind of surrounded by fog. You have almost, not to sound very kind of poetic in a sense, but you have almost like a North Star where it's kind of poking through that fog where you can, even though you don't see a path, you see a little light in the distance that you can just follow. And for me, as long as you have that, everything that follows is just the added details.
I think if that light exists, then you can avoid the spiral.
Yeah.
You can avoid the dial.
Yeah.
You can avoid the dial going crazy, because in the fog, you actually do get a glimmer of a sense of direction of where I need to be going. But I'm so grateful we were able to do this, because your mom and I, we're navigating our way through this work culture with Nana, in the house. We're navigating our way through the social media, not only in our own lives, but watching you guys and thinking about you two in your lives with social media. And then, of course, with Nana, who's completely addicted to TikTok.
Yeah.
Nana at 84 is addicted to TikTok. And then we're watching a generation like you entering a workforce that is much more complicated than it was for us 35 years ago, 40 years ago. It's a more complicated workforce in the light of some of the things like wokeism. And then, of course, you've got so many more things to be able to layer on that, like the plethora of bad nutrition, ultra-processed foods that are being thrown on that play a role inside that. And the fact that everyone stays indoors and that is not outdoors, which is playing a role in that. And video games. And, I mean, there's so many other layered factors that come into it. But that thing that you said of just having a sense of who you are and having a sense of identity, of purpose, of meaning, of what do I stand for and what are my values? I think that's what it's all about.
To end on that like kind of positive note, you mentioned video games. I think it's a cool way of kind of figuring it out is it's so easy to look onto the negatives, but the way I kind of formulated it, almost like we're playing a video game where generations ago, they formulated this foundation, and you're kind of starting in a save file where millions and millions of years have been progressing and it's been adding on to the game. And you're at this save file now where you can have the choices that your ancestors wouldn't have had. And touching on to that person from, 1924, someone in 2024, what in 100 years from now, things like diseases that we have today won't exist. Things like maybe unemployment and that kind of stuff goes away, and with the roles of AI and how everything's changing there. So it's so easy to look on the negatives as the now, but if you look in the grand picture of things, it's quite not easy, but it's definitely doable to look into the long distance and see a positive side of things.
Like the amount of books that you've read, the attitude you've got, the listening that you do, the podcasts that you do, the work that you do in yourself, it's refreshing. I've got to tell you, it's exciting to know that somebody young takes such an amazing amount of interest in that kind of thing. And you stay positive and you stay, you surrounded yourself with good people, with good values. You're very careful of your community that you keep. I've noticed you don't hang around people with crap attitudes. You choose the 5 people close to you very carefully. And it's been for me, I don't know how many dads get a chance to do this with their son. I hope we can do it again.
Yeah.
So here's my final question to you. If we did it again, let's say that you're in Amsterdam, back at university, and if we did it again, what other topic do you think would be an interesting topic to explore?
Jeez. That's a very good question to put on the spot. I wouldn't really have an exact topic to talk about. I would have things that I feel like we don't need to talk about. For one, once again, this opinion, I would say a lot of my opinions are somewhat unpopular, but I don't think we need to talk about the roles of AI and that kind of stuff, because I feel like it's such a big thing in society nowadays with these AI topics, just blabber about it, and then the main focus is, but in reality we just need to find a balance of AI in our real life. So these kind of huge topics that are already heavily being discussed about, I have no interest in talking about.
And we have no influence on. Yeah,
exactly. So I feel like, once again, I have really none of the vaguest of clues to the exact topic, but there are topics that I feel like are topics that maybe not heavily discussed upon, but definitely affect people. And something like that would be quite interesting.
So I'll throw one out there, and that's relationships, marriage. Is marriage still, if in a world, but we're not going to talk about it now.
I would also kind of another topic is elaborating more on that work culture. So, for example, yeah, the whole culture within it. So, for example, I feel like, just to kind of give a glance at the moment, but with a lot of the way that people are today, let's say someone's gay. A lot of the time, people's responses, oh, I don't care that you're gay. Like, you can be gay, I don't care. But I feel like that's also a slight issue in society, just saying I don't care. Because, like, for example, I have friends who are Arsenal supporters. I'm a Tottenham supporter, and I can say I don't care. I'm a friend of yours, even though you support Arsenal.
Are you saying that being an Arsenal supporter is like being
no?
gay?
Let me elaborate more. Let me elaborate more on that. But then, let's say I have a whole friend group that are Tottenham fans, and we just don't care that he's Arsenal, so he's forced to watch these games by himself. That kind of stuff. But in reality, like, you should be watching the games with him. You should be not letting him eat by himself and watching it with him. So we can't imagine. So neither of us are homosexual, but so we have no experience and no knowledge of all the troubles that they must have gone through, hiding these things to their friends, their families, that kind of thing. And so to say, I don't care, is to just not acknowledge all of the things that they've gone through in the past. So I feel like as a society, it needs to move more towards, we do care, but not in a negative way. We care. And from here on, we want you to not go through this alone, that kind of stuff. So kind of reformulating how we think about minorities in society would be quite cool as well.
I tell you what, if there was a way to end this, it's that. It's to not go through this alone.
Yeah.
As the world changes and we sit more on our phones and we worry more about cancel culture and we're thinking and anxious and depressed and heading into, and what's happening is we're doing too much alone. And if we go back to 1924, normally in 1924, the neighbors would be sitting on the porch together. You'd be walking in the street because you wouldn't be on the phone. We wouldn't be going through anything alone.
Yeah.
We'd be doing everything together as a community. And moving forward, what a great way is just that. If we do less alone and more together. Clay, love you heaps, and I'm really flippin' grateful. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you.
Good talk. Very good talk.